Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz. Jeff Bennett is away. On the NewsHour tonight, the FBI charges a sitting judge with obstruction for allegedly helping an undocumented immigrant avoid arrest. World leaders converge on the Vatican for the funeral of the late Pope Francis as the faithful continue to pay their respects. And the head of the World Food Program speaks out about the challenges the agency faces as Israel blocks aid to Gaza.
People are starving, and many more are going to starve as a result of this. We need to be able to not only have a ceasefire, but be able to get in at scale.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by Friends of the NewsHour, including Jim and Nancy Bildner, and the Robert and Virginia Schiller Foundation. The Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad. The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for more than 50 years advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world, at hewlett.org.
Cunard is a proud supporter of public television. On a voyage with Cunard, the world awaits. A world of flavor, diverse destinations, and immersive experiences. A world of leisure and British style. All with Cunard's White Star service.
The Charles F. Kettering Foundation, working to advance inclusive democracies. Learn more at kettering.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And Friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Today, an escalation in the Trump administration's battle with the judiciary and local authorities over the president's deportation agenda. FBI agents arrested Milwaukee County Judge Hannah Dugan on charges of obstructing immigration agents. When officers attempted to arrest Eduardo Flores Ruiz, a Mexican citizen, last week, the FBI alleges in a criminal complaint that Judge Dugan, quote, escorted Flores Ruiz and his counsel out of the courtroom through the jury door, which leads to a non-public area of the courthouse. Earlier today, Attorney General Pam Bondi addressed both Judge Dugan's arrest and another recent arrest of a former New Mexico judge charged with hiding an alleged Tren de Aragua gang member.
I think some of these judges think they are beyond and above the law, and they are not. And we're sending a very strong message today. If you are harboring a fugitive, we don't care who you are.
Our White House correspondent Laura Barone Lopez joins me now here for the latest. Laura, an extraordinary move, as we say, a sort of escalation in the ongoing showdown between the Trump administration and judges who they say are undermining their agenda. Break this down for us.
So much of the public first found out about this when FBI Director Kash Patel posted on X that the arrest had occurred, accusing the judge of, quote, intentionally misdirecting federal agents away from Ruiz in her courtroom, although that's not what the official criminal complaint alleges. So the complaint details that members of an ICE task force came to the courthouse last Friday to arrest Flores Ruiz. That included ICE, FBI, DEA agents, and Flores Ruiz was at the court for a misdemeanor battery charges tied to domestic abuse, so not for an immigration hearing. And Judge Dugan told agents to talk to the chief judge. She allowed the undocumented immigrant to exit through a jury door. Agents spotted Flores Ruiz later in a public hallway, and at one point a DEA agent even rode rode in the elevator with Flores Ruiz and with his attorney. And that's all laid out in the complaint. Ultimately, they apprehended him down the street near the courthouse after he was running away from Adrian. So today, though, the judge was arrested on 2 charges of obstructing a proceeding of federal agents and concealing an individual to prevent discovery and arrest.
You talked to a former FBI special agent about all of this. What did they have to say on this?
I spoke to former FBI Special Agent Asha Rangappa, and she believed that both charges could be an uphill battle for the Justice Department in court because it's hard to prove corrupt intent. And she questioned whether the Trump administration was not very focused on the merits of the case and more focused on the signal that it could send.
I think this could be highly embarrassing for the Justice Department if they take this this kind of case, which is a spectacle, and then don't prevail in court. And I have to wonder whether this is not so much about the merits of this case, but perhaps to send a message.
Again, Judge Duggan was arrested on the grounds of a Milwaukee courthouse where she presides, according to the U.S. Marshal's office. And so that kind of spectacle, which is what Asha said, may be sending a chilling effect to others across the legal community.
Now, Laura, you've been reporting on this. Administration officials have been threatening for months to prosecute officials, judges and lawyers and lawmakers, people they accuse of wrongfully aiding undocumented immigrants. Now that this has happened, what's been the reaction, and are more arrests like it expected?
It appears as though more could be expected, Amna, because administration officials are saying this is not the end. President Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, posted today on X, quote, "Nobody should be surprised by the arrest of 2 judges." He also said that if you are actively impeding our enforcement efforts, you will be prosecuted. But just as Asha Rangappa, the former special agent, said, I also spoke to a former prosecutor, Julius Kim, who has worked alongside as a lawyer, the Judge Duggan, who was arrested. And he said that this type of arrest of a judge is not typical, it's not normal, that he is worried that the process is being politicized, and that ultimately, again, that the administration is not necessarily focused on seeing this case all the way through to the end, but is more focused on the larger message that it could send to judges who may act in a similar manner to Judge Duggan. As for the reaction from Democratic lawmakers and the public in Milwaukee, it's been very swift. And today, there were protests outside Judge Duggan's courthouse with chants of people saying, "Free the judge now."
I want to ask you about something on a different front. I know you've been covering as well. We saw a major reversal from the Trump administration on their immigration agenda when it comes to restoring the status of thousands of foreign students after the administration had terminated their records in a federal system. What happened here?
So earlier this month, the Trump administration terminated the records of thousands of foreign students from a federal database that tracks students across the U.S. This database was created after 9/11 to track foreign students. And in response to those terminations, there were 100 or so lawsuits. Dozens of judges blocked the termination, saying that this wasn't lawful. And so today in a federal court, the Trump administration did a complete reversal, essentially saying that it will restore the status, the record of these foreign students in this federal database that tracks them. Now, the DHS said that they have not necessarily reversed course on a single visa revocation, but this is a key important status for students to have, and it affected some 4,000 foreign students.
What are the experts telling you the impact could be here?
So even though their status is being restored in a court hearing today, the administration said that ICE is still developing a policy that could provide a framework for these record terminations of students in the future. And I spoke to Charles Kuck. He is an immigration attorney that says that the impact of these record terminations is potentially irrevocable.
They have paid a very serious price. Restoring their status does not fix the problem that many of these students have. Many lost jobs because of this, lost job offers. Some lost the ability to transfer schools during this period of time, and many lost their visas. What we don't know yet is how ICE is going to fix any of these problems.
Immigration attorney Charles Kuck said that these terminations are sending a loud and clear message. Despite the fact that they're being restored now, they're sending a message to foreign students that once you're done with school, that you should get out of the United States.
Laura Braun-Lopez, thank you as always.
Thank you.
The The day's other headlines begin in Moscow, where Russian negotiators say they made progress in talks with the U.S. to end the war in Ukraine.
How are you, Mr. President?
U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff sat down with Russian President Vladimir Putin reportedly for 3 hours today. A Kremlin official said they discussed the possibility of direct talks between Moscow and Kyiv. All this comes as President Trump continues his push for Ukraine to make major concessions to end the war. In a Time magazine interview released today, Trump said, quote, "Crimea will stay with Russia." Moscow invaded and occupied Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula back in 2014. In Kyiv, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky paid tribute to victims of a Russian attack earlier this week, and he said Ukraine could not and would not recognize Crimea as Russian land.
Тимчасово окуповані території, вони тимчасово окуповані. Вони всі належать.
Temporarily occupied territories are just temporarily occupied, but they all belong to Ukraine. I think this is absolutely a just and legal position, according to the Ukrainian constitution, as well as international law.
In eastern Ukraine, officials say a Russian drone struck a residential building overnight, killing 3 people in the city of Pavlograd. And outside of Moscow, a car bomb killed a senior military officer, the second such attack on a top Russian commander in 4 months. Russia blamed Ukrainian intelligence for the attack. Ukrainian authorities did not comment. Indian and Pakistani soldiers briefly exchanged gunfire across the border of the disputed region of Kashmir today. Tensions are rising between the 2 nuclear nations since a deadly attack on tourists earlier this week. India has blamed Pakistan for Tuesday's attack in a Kashmiri resort town. Pakistan denies any connection. Diplomatic relations have spiraled in just 3 days with the suspension of a water treaty, visas, trade, and travel. The United Nations has appealed to both countries to use maximum restraint. In a Manhattan court today, Luigi Mangione pleaded not guilty to a federal murder charge for the killing of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Thompson was shot in Midtown Manhattan last December outside of the company's investor conference. Department of Justice prosecutors under Attorney General Pam Bondi said they would seek the death penalty for Mangione. He had already pled not guilty to separate New York and Pennsylvania state charges. Those state charges would carry a maximum punishment of life in prison. Also in New York, former Representative George Santos has been sentenced to more than 7 years behind bars. He pleaded guilty last summer to wire fraud and identity theft. Santos arrived in federal court this morning and reportedly sobbed as the judge handed down his punishment. It caps off a dramatic saga for the disgraced Republican who defrauded donors and fabricated his life story during his 2022 run for Congress. Today, prosecutors praised the outcome.
He told lie after lie until it caught up with him, until we caught up with him and exposed him for what he truly was, an opportunist and a fraud.
Santos was expelled from the House after barely serving a year in office. He's due to report to prison in July. And after a week of wild market swings and major gains, on Wall Street today, stocks were mostly quiet. The Dow Jones Industrial Average climbed back from early losses to basically break even. Tech stocks carried the day, sending the Nasdaq up by more than 1%, and the S&P 500 also registered a small gain. Still to come on the NewsHour, how CEOs are shifting their business plans because of tariffs. David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart weigh in on the week's political headlines. And political cartoonists navigate a changing media landscape.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Today in Rome, a last chance for the faithful to view Pope Francis in his casket before his funeral tomorrow. More than 250,000 people over the 3 days of public viewing processed by Francis, resting in a simple wood coffin. 54 heads of state, including President Trump, will attend tomorrow's service in St. Peter's Basilica. Again tonight, special correspondent Malcolm Brabant reports from Rome.
On this, the last day of lying in state, the faithful lined up at dawn to pay tribute to the late pontiff. The scenes inside St. Peter's were more reverential than earlier in the week, after the Vatican ordered people to stop photographing Francis in his casket.
Truly, I felt in my heart as though I had lost someone very close to me. But it was a moment to stay in prayer for him, to grant him peace, to give thanks for everything he has done for the church. This is the feeling of gratitude.
We spent time at the coffin of Pope Francis, just sitting in silence for a few minutes and praying and remembering a very, very beautiful and faithful ministry.
Stephen Cottrell, the Archbishop of York, is acting head of the Church of England.
I think it was his simplicity of life and his humility which is what has made his papacy appear so different. And I think that's something that all of us as Christian leaders can learn from. And the fact that he was able to lay aside some of the pomp and the ceremony was something that is very beautiful and has touched our hearts.
Despite Pope Francis's reforms, Catholicism remains far more rigid than the Archbishop of York's domain, and not surprisingly, he favours a continuity successor.
What I see when I look at the world is confusion, sorrow, hurt, and the things that God has given us in Jesus Christ are exactly what the world needs. So that's what those of us who follow Christ and lead the church, that's who we need to be. And that's what I hope for in the next Pope.
But these are troubled waters. Following the funeral, a storm is brewing between liberals and conservatives.
I think in many respects the Catholic Church right now is like society in general, that is polarized. And I would hope that the next Pope would bring some peace, let the dust settle, and bring some authentic dialogue, not just posturing, not just throwing talking points at one another, but really bring some conversation.
Father Robert Sirico heads a centre-right institution that offers a moral perspective on the free market. Like his actor brother Tony, who played Paulie Walnuts in The Sopranos, Father Robert is a straight talker. Do you not think that the church has to become more progressive to keep in touch with the way in which society is changing?
I think when I look at churches that have attempted that model, whether it's the Anglican Church in England or the German Church, I see it dying. Where I see it vibrant and living is in those more traditional parts of the Catholic Church in the United States, and in particular on a more international level in Africa. I think we've gotten to the point now in Africa that they could be sending missionaries to the West.
Do you believe that the church is in an existential crisis at all in terms of losing relevance?
I think society is in an existential crisis, and that society needs the message of the church.
Some Vatican experts believe it's possible that the next pope might be a conservative from Africa, where Catholicism is booming. Pope Francis from Argentina broke Europe's dominance of the papacy, and veteran Vatican observer Robert Mickens believes that European cardinals aim to reassert their authority.
One of the things we should look for in this conclave are the Europeans, especially those who are more traditional, to put forward a candidate that they think can get enough votes to win this conclave, this papal election, in order to turn the church back to a different path. I think there's a sense among some of the more conservative, if you will, cardinals that Pope Francis has gone too far.
Having accommodated tens of thousands of mourners, the Italian authorities have now switched their attention to providing security for scores of world leaders who'll be attending tomorrow's funeral. Before departing for Rome, President Trump said he hoped to make progress on trade and the Ukraine conflict.
It's going to be very interesting. We're going to meet with a lot of the foreign leaders. They want to meet. Trade deals are going very well. I think Russia and Ukraine, I think they're coming along, we hope. Anyway, we're going to Rome to pay our respects, and we'll be leaving that same day. We'll be coming back home tomorrow night.
Seen here with Pope Francis in 2017, President Trump is expected to be seated in a third-tier row of St. Peter's, behind the elite of the Catholic Church and members of royal families. Ukraine's President Zelensky, who enjoyed a much closer relationship with Pope Francis, was due to attend the funeral, but may have to stay in Kyiv because of important military meetings. If Zelensky does make it, it'll be the first time the two leaders will come face to face since their acrimonious meeting in the Oval Office 2 months ago. The Vatican will be hoping that nothing detracts from Pope Francis's last earthly journey. Tonight, in keeping with the solemn ancient tradition, Pope Francis's face was covered with a white silk cloth and his coffin sealed in readiness for tomorrow's elaborate funeral. Humble to the very last, Pope Francis is rebelling against the grandeur of the Vatican. His final request was to be buried here at the Basilica Santa Maria Maggiore instead of in St. Peter's, where most popes are interred. The only inscription on his tomb will be his name in Latin, Franciscus. This church is destined to become one of Christianity's most important shrines, as the calls grow for Francis to be fast-tracked to sainthood. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Malcolm Brabant in Rome.
Both President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping are reportedly looking for ways to ease the trade war between the two countries. But with tariffs in effect around the world, corporate leaders are raising serious concerns about the ongoing tension and uncertainty already created. Many are now asking the White House to reconsider new tariffs that are set to come into play next month. Earlier this week, the CEOs of Walmart and Target reportedly warned the president there could be empty shelves within weeks. To get more of a sense of how businesses are reacting, I spoke earlier with Rich Lesser. He's the global chair of Boston Consulting Group, who works with CEOs of major companies. Rich Lesser, welcome to the NewsHour. Thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure.
So you have been meeting with and convening groups of CEOs, not just around the country, but really around the world, to talk about how they are navigating this moment. What did they tell you behind closed doors about their concerns and how they're approaching this moment?
Yeah, it's very interesting. Of course, the start of those conversations is always about the high-level stuff, the general economic forecast, inflation, GDP, all that sort of stuff. But then when you get beyond that, you typically get into 3 different kinds of topics. The first topic is just uncertainty. I mean, the tariffs are a challenge, and there's been a lot written and discussed about that. But what's even more challenging is not knowing where they're going to land. And that makes it harder to want to invest. You might want to invest, but it makes it harder to know how and when to invest, whether it's doing deals or adding manufacturing assets or building infrastructure. And so the uncertainty is the first topic. I think the second is many people want to come to the U.S. and to build, and that's been true even leading up to the inauguration. I heard that quite frequently. I think the workforce issues are a real challenge. Many of the towns that the president rightly identified as having been decimated by what's happened over the last few decades, those people have left those towns.
Yeah.
It's not easy to know how you're going to restart. It's not easy to find workforce. And I've heard that from CEOs across a whole range of industries. And then the third is anytime you have this much change in such a short time, there's a risk of supply chain shocks. And obviously, this isn't COVID. It's nothing like COVID. But we saw when the whole world gets changed overnight, you can have supply chain issues. So how we get from where we've been to where we're going, the risk of the bumps along the way being substantial, like those things are what's on people's minds.
And it's a bit of sort of paralysis among those leaders in terms of decision making because of that. Is that right?
So yes and no. If you're the CEO, you got to be ready to make decisions, whatever the world is.
Yeah.
But there are just some decisions that it's better to wait a while on. And I think right now, until we get a sense of where things are going to land, how these negotiations will proceed, there's a lot of them going on in parallel. Once we know where they land, then I think CEOs are likely to feel more confident taking decisions about their investment posture, their supply chain footprint, how they want to evolve their business, and what they need to do on things like pricing that they have to navigate as well.
So that's where consumers are paying attention, right? Things like pricing. From their perspective, when are they going to start to feel all of this, and how will it show up in their everyday lives?
You have to make an assumption about where we're going to end up when you say that. And I honestly don't know, right? I mean, this was a more optimistic week. We saw the stock market doing better because people are more optimistic we'll get to lower tariffs. And the president said some positive words in that line. if we are where we are today, some of the examples are things like, a near one will be bananas, just to take a really simple one, because all our bananas are imported. We're not going to grow bananas here probably ever, but certainly not for many years. Right now there's a 10% tariff from a country, say like Honduras, and there is very little value added in the US, so that 10% tariff will probably hit about a 7.5% increase on the price of bananas on the shelf. Bananas aren't so expensive, but it is a staple product for many, many families. If I look further out, I think some of the seasonal things that will come over the course of the rest of the year, back to school, Halloween, Christmas, in each of those, consumers buy a range of things that are made in other countries, whether it's clothing for kids and shoes and some of the school supplies, whether it's Halloween costumes, whether it's Christmas tree, artificial Christmas trees that are made overseas. And then, if you bring it in a more personal way, even something like bridal gowns. The good news is brides tend to get their dresses well before the wedding. So the weddings that are going to happen over the summer, probably most of those dresses are already in the US. But if you project out to the fall and you have, those gowns are maybe on the water right now or about to be shipped, and those could go up substantially in cost. There's actually little stores, small businesses that sell bridal gowns that are really worried about how they'll stay in business as prices go up. So again, hopefully this will resolve. We don't know, but those are the kind of things that I think consumers will actually feel directly in their lives as this plays forward.
You mentioned that brief rally we saw in the markets. That followed the president kind of softening his stance, at least in some of the rhetoric when it comes to the trade war with China. And that followed a meeting with CEOs at the White House. Does that tell you that he is listening to business leaders in these cases?
I think the president genuinely is listening, and listening to a wide range of input, some of whom have very different views. I mean, he has advisors in the White House, obviously, who are very strong advocates for tariffs. I think most CEOs really have concerns about it, and particularly very broad-based. And I'm really glad that he's engaging with them. I mean, the people we met with are really some of the best CEOs in this country. And I think, and they're also very honest. I know all three of them, and they're quite very honest people, and I think they will tell him in private what they really expect to happen, and that's a good thing.
You've also said previously that you believe that President Trump has accurately tapped into a real problem in the country that we've ignored for too long. But the way that he's going about addressing it now, we now have a series of country-by-country deals, potential deals going on that could go on for quite some time. So even if you believe that we need to reshore manufacturing jobs, we need to address trade imbalances, is this the best way to go about that?
We will only know looking backward. That in all honesty, I think that if we end up exactly where we are now, I think there will be a lot of second-order impacts, whether it's things like bananas or bridal gowns or things like that, that are probably not things we're going to make in the U.S. going forward and that will have impact. The group I'm the most concerned actually are small businesses. Big businesses have a lot of capabilities, a lot of resilience, particularly since COVID, into their supply chains. They have a lot of ability to make moves. It will still be costly, but they'll figure out a way. I think a lot of smaller businesses would be really challenged if things end up where they are right now, but hopefully that's not where we're heading.
In the meantime, we track the bananas and the bridal gowns, right?
And back to school.
And back to school. Rich Lesser, Global Chair of Boston Consulting Group, thank you so much. Such a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Today, the World Food Program announced it had delivered the last of its food in Gaza and warned the kitchens it's been supporting there would run out of food in days. Nick Schifrin spoke earlier with Cindy McCain, head of the World Food Program, about conditions in Gaza, a lack of funding that's forced her to cut 30% of the WFP staff worldwide, and the unprecedented challenges feeding the hungriest in another country that she's currently visiting, Haiti.
The World Food Program is the world's largest humanitarian organization, and today it says some 340 million people face severe food insecurity because of conflict, instability, and climate change. This week, WFP Executive Director Cindy McCain is visiting Haiti, where some 5.7 million people, more than half the country's population, faces high levels of acute food insecurity. And earlier this week, the UN warned that gang violence had spread so much without more international support, there will be more violence, and Haiti could, quote, face total collapse. And Cindy McCain now joins me from Cap Haitien in Haiti. Cindy McCain, thanks very much. Welcome back. to the NewsHour. I just read all of those UN dire warnings about Haiti. You've been traveling around. You visited schools that provide locally grown meals. You visited factories that produce snack kits for kids. How dire is the lack of food for so many?
It's a very, very serious problem, as you just stated. Haiti itself is a powder keg. And with the lack of food and the lack of ability to obtain food for most of the population, this is a place that could go at any moment. I'm very worried that the world has forgotten about Haiti. We really, really, really need to pay attention here, and we really, really need to coordinate countries to get together and do action here to help Haiti get back on its feet.
The WFP has been negotiating with armed groups to try and get access to some of these areas that are difficult to reach. But how much has the violence impeded your ability to actually help the hungry?
Well, it's impeded a lot. We do negotiate with the gangs. We do get in. But again, the violence itself, the inability to have a coordinated effort that's at scale to be able to feed people it's non-existent here. You know, there's famine here. No one really talks about famine in Haiti, but there's about 8,500 people that are in famine conditions now. That's tragic.
Let's switch over to Gaza. The World Food Program has been delivering flour. The flour has now run out. The WFP has been handing out food parcels. That has now run out. And then we have the announcement today, as we said, you've been delivering food for kitchens to cook hot meals, and that has now run out in terms of that food stock. This is a consequence of Israel's block on aid into Gaza for some 7 weeks now. What does this mean for the people of Gaza?
Oh, this is a tragic set of circumstances. People are starving, and many more are going to starve as a result of this. We need to be able to not only have a ceasefire, but be able to get in at scale. Our last truck left today. That's the last of what we had stored inside Gaza. There's nothing left. There's no place to go for food anymore.
You and the UN overall has warned in the past that North Gaza especially has been on the brink of famine. What are the conditions there now? Are there fears of famine today?
There are fears of famine, sure. Our inability to get in and our inability to deliver at scale is what's causing this. We need a ceasefire. We need to be able to get in at scale. We need the world to say, let the humanitarians in.
Another emergency worker in Gaza recently said that this phase of the war, since the fighting resumed on March 18th, has been one of the, quote, darkest chapters of the war. How has this phase been different, and have aid workers been killed while doing their jobs?
Yes to all of that. Our people that have been on the ground from the very beginning because they can't get out I worry about their well-being. It is a very dark period. The world has turned its back on what we really need to be doing. Food is not political. And to make food political is something that is unconscionable, number one. But number two, it just shouldn't happen.
The Israeli government, as you know, has been arguing that Hamas has used food aid as a tool to maintain its power in Gaza, for example, taking the food and selling it and converting that money into some military capacity. Do you agree, and how can you prevent that?
I don't necessarily agree with that. No, our people have not seen evidence of that. Now, mind you, we've seen violence, but these were hungry people trying to get food off a truck. It's very hard to watch, which our people are having to do, watch people starve to death, and knowing that we have the capability to deliver and we can't do it.
I want to switch over to the World Food Program itself, as well as U.S. support for it and U.S. foreign aid. Can you confirm that WFP plans to cut some 30% of the workforce, some 6,000 jobs, and why have you made that decision, if that is correct?
Yes, that is correct. We, like everyone else, have lost 40% of our budget. From our standpoint, we were already in the middle of cutting back. So now this is just kind of the top end of this now that we're going to have to remove jobs, and it breaks my heart, but it's what's necessary right now.
You and I have talked before about how the funding shortfall preceded the Trump administration. We've seen the Trump administration take away some funds to WFP, give back some funds to WFP. Right now, do you have the money that the Trump administration has said it is giving you, because you warned that the cuts that the Trump administration was going to make to the WFP would be, quote, amount to a death sentence for millions of people?
We're dealing with a situation where sometimes the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. We have received some of the funds that were promised, yes, that were in the pipeline. We're not completely there yet. The world collectively has stepped back from some of these disasters and these issues that we face every day with regards to hunger. It's not just the United States, it's also European countries, it's our Middle Eastern friends, although they're beginning to step up a little bit now, and our Asian friends also.
But take on the argument that the Trump administration has been making. One example from the State Department says it has been fixing, quote, decades of mismanagement, fraud, and misaligned priorities in the delivery of foreign assistance. Do you believe U.S. assistance, U.S. priorities on foreign aid have been misaligned?
You know, I can't really answer that. I have never seen that. But what I do know is that we were all top heavy. We were big. We've gotten big, and AID was no different in that. It was time for all of us to relook at how we operate. I would never say anything bad about AID. We've been great partners in the field, and we have worked together, obviously, for years and years and years.
Cindy McCain, Executive Director of the World Food Program, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
From dysfunction at the Department of Defense to a judge in Wisconsin being arrested by the FBI, it's shaped up to be quite the week. Luckily, here to break it all down, I'm joined by Brooks and Capehart. That is New York Times columnist David Brooks and Jonathan Capehart, associate editor for The Washington Post. It's great to see you both. So, David, I want to start off with you because in the last almost 100 days in now to his presidency, just in this last week, we saw a bit of a reversal or a walk back from President Trump on a couple of stances. One was a sort of softening on the rhetoric towards China and the trade war. And the other, as Laura reported earlier, the administration abruptly reversing itself on the potential cancellation of thousands of foreign student visas. I don't mean to connect these two in any way. They are not connected, but they did happen this week. And I just wonder, as you reflect on where they are now, what this says to you about how the administration is processing feedback and who they're listening to.
Right. It suggests, well, as we learned in Trump 1, they don't have a long-term strategy. There's no policy process. We're going to do this, and then we're going to stick through it no matter who says what. They just don't do that. Trump is instinctive. He responds to the moment. And the lesson for people who want to defend institutions, whether you're a university, whether you're a law firm, whether you're a scientific research center, whether you're a business who doesn't like what tariffs are doing to your business, is that you can throw sand in the gears of this administration and they will respond. They're going to do what they want to do. But people who oppose what they want to do and want to defend American institutions can do lawsuits, they can do lobbying, there can be leaking, there can be protests. There are all these things that can happen, and they've proven this week they will have an effect. Donald Trump listened to, like the CEO of Walmart. He listens to the polls. He listens when there's all these lawsuits. He listened to something about the international students. Now, that doesn't say things are going back to normal. The tariffs are still higher. If you're in a university, your international students are still in jeopardy. But it shows what can be done, that there is possibility for an opposition to Trump to have successes if they can apply just relentless pressure.
Jonathan, what do you make of that? You take away the same lessons?
Yes, I do. You know, David had a great column today in the New York Times where he talked about, what the opposition should do in the face of an administration that hit the ground running. And the whole point of this administration has been to flood the zone, confuse everybody, confound everybody, and get as much done and through the gates as possible before the opposition has a chance to recover. And right now what we've been seeing is not just the opposition recovering, but the American people deciding that they don't exactly like what they see. A raft of polls have started coming out in anticipation of the president's first 100 days. And on the economy and on immigration, the two issues he ran on or said he was going to run on and change things immediately, he is now underwater in at least 2 polls that come to mind. But we're going to see more, if not later today, then over the weekend, showing that the president is losing ground on the 2 issues he campaigned on.
Meanwhile, David, as Laura also reported earlier, this is other story we're tracking, which seems to mark a different chapter in the ongoing immigration agenda of this administration. That was the FBI arresting and charging a sitting judge in Milwaukee. Now, the FBI says that she obstructed their agents when they were trying to arrest an undocumented immigrant who was in her courthouse. It's been reported she allowed him to leave through a side door. But what does this say to you now in terms of what the administration is willing to do and how this was carried out?
Well, obviously, they're trying to send a note of intimidation, not only to her, but to all judges and maybe to all Americans. But I don't yet know the specific details of this case, whether she escorted the guy out the jury door or whether she's let him. So that's all murky. I don't want to comment on this specific case. But especially on the issue of immigration, there are a lot of people who are appalled by what the administration is doing. And there will be times for civil disobedience. And to me, let's say she did escort this guy out the door. If federal enforcement agencies come to your courtroom and you help a guy escape, that is 2 things. One, it strikes me as maybe something illegal, but it also strikes me as something heroic. And in times of trouble, then people are sometimes called to do civil disobedience. And in my view, when people do civil disobedience, they have to pay the price. That's part of the heroism of it, frankly. And so you can both think that she shouldn't have legally done this, and that morally protecting somebody against, or maybe not even in this case, but in other cases, frankly, a predatory enforcement agency. Sometimes civil disobedience is necessary. And I don't know if we'll get to this point, but we could get to this point in weeks or months where acts of civil disobedience on a lot of fronts may be necessary. And the Trump administration will probably welcome that kind of fight, but their opponents should welcome that kind of fight. And that's one of the ways you can shift public opinion, because one of the ways authoritarians lose control is when their opponents protest in a nonviolent way and the authoritarians crack down violently. That's the way you delegitimize an authoritarian regime. And so that it may come to that.
Jonathan, what do you make of that on both fronts here, both the accountability part of it and also the message being sent?
Well, certainly the message being sent is intimidation, and it is part of an ongoing activity by the president to intimidate the judiciary, from openly defying lawful orders of courts not to do X, Y, or Z, to what we just saw in that courtroom in Wisconsin. I read the affidavit that was a probable cause to take action against the judge. And you know, reading that affidavit in David made me think of how the Trump administration is very good at muddying up the waters here. So you now have a situation where a defendant who was in the courtroom because he was charged on 3 counts of battery, domestic abuse, infliction of physical pain or injury. And you read in the affidavit that the judge was told that ICE was there. She talked to them and she said, "You need to go talk to the chief judge." And when they go and talk to the chief judge, he said, you know, I got to come up with the policy here because we need to figure out how we're going to work this out. But did acknowledge that they are able to do the arrests in public places. All that to say is that the Trump administration is going to hang their hats on that. And meanwhile, as David says, and I agree, that you have a judge who is, it seems to me, taking a moral stand. I look forward to hearing from that judge, because if she doesn't stand up against what's now happened to her, which is a ratcheting up of the intimidation against the judiciary, then no other judge is going to take that same stand, and that is my big fear.
Well, I have to ask you both about what we're seeing unfolding at the Department of Defense. David, separate from what we're calling Signalgate, right, which is Secretary of Defense Hegseth's use of a commercial messaging app and sending sensitive information, there have been a number of stories questioning his leadership at the agency. He's fired 4 top officials in just the last week. We saw his top spokesman, John Ulyett, resign a few days ago, and he wrote about the chaos inside, saying this: "Even strong backers of the Secretary like me must admit the last month has been a full-blown meltdown at the Pentagon. It's becoming a real problem for the administration." Where is the line here in terms of why the president continues to stand by him and when he might not?
Ulyett wrote that piece in Politico, And I thought it was the work of Tolstoy. It was a work of genius. It was like mind-boggling, that op-ed, because basically he said, I'm friends with Pete Hegseth. I'm a longtime supporter of Pete Hegseth. I salute Pete Hegseth. The guy's a total disaster. And I would tell Aliat that if you think your friendship with Pete Hegseth is going to last, and he was saying, like, I really value our friendship, I wouldn't bet on that. I think that relationship might be over. But the point is that Pete Hegseth has always been attacked by his friends. At Fox, at the veterans organizations he was part of. It was the people he worked closest with and who claimed to be on his side that were always the critics. So Pete Hegseth needs to be better at picking friends or better at running things.
Jonathan, got less than a minute left. What's your take?
Look, Secretary Hegseth is in a job he is not qualified to be in, that he shouldn't have even been nominated to be in, and now we are seeing the results of that. Anybody who is using a public messaging system in what's supposed to be one of the most secure places within the federal government, that tells you everything you need to know. Donald Trump says he's with Pete Hegseth, until which time he is no longer with Pete Hegseth. Loyalty with Donald Trump only runs one way.
Jonathan Capehart, David Brooks. Always great to talk to you both. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Amna.
Thank you.
A picture is worth 1,000 words. It's a well-worn phrase, of course, but there's special resonance when applied to editorial cartoons, a centuries-old tradition that's evolving as the media landscape itself does. Senior arts correspondent Jeffrey Brown takes a closer look for our series, Art in Action, exploring the intersection of art and democracy and our ongoing Canvas coverage.
And I'll go back, and figure out which lines need, more definition or strength.
It's art in the service of strong political opinion, backed by hours of research. It's funny, often using caricature, but with serious intent. Ann Telnis has been creating editorial cartoons for decades. A self-described liberal, she's a Pulitzer Prize winner in 2001, a finalist in 2022.
An editorial cartoon, even if the art is strong, if it doesn't have a strong point of view, then it fails. Of course, if your art's good, that's even better, because then that will grab the reader faster.
Michael Ramirez, who calls himself a constitutional conservative, is a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner, another longtime leading practitioner of this craft.
When people look at the editorial page, it's probably one of the primary things that they look at. And therefore, it has a sort of measure of influence. In a Super Bowl ad, you've got about 5 seconds to capture their attention, another 5 seconds to make the sale. The only difference is, instead of selling a commodity or a product, I'm selling an idea.
But these days, who's buying? Who's even seeing the work? According to the Herblock Foundation, named after the legendary Washington Post cartoonist who died in 2001, the number of editorial cartoonists at newspapers, many of them syndicated nationally, dropped from more than 120 to fewer than 30 in the past 25 years. One challenge, economic, amid the ever-shrinking newspaper business. Another, ideological, amid national divisions so profound that many papers seek to avoid strong satire and opinion.
There's a less tolerance for satire, because satire involves things that aren't necessarily easy for people to accept. Depictions of people, criticizing people.
For Ann Telnis, the tolerance factor hit home directly. Earlier this year, she quit the Washington Post, her employer since 2008, after experiencing a first. One of her cartoons was spiked. It pictured billionaire tech and media executives, including Amazon's Jeff Bezos, who also owns the Post, bowing with bags of money before incoming President Trump.
I had not planned to quit. I wanted to continue, commenting on what I thought was important. And I just realized I can't work like that.
You just felt like there are now things you're not allowed to say.
Yeah, I thought this was the beginning. This is it's not going to stop here.
Michael Ramirez's work appears in both the Las Vegas Review-Journal, which publishes him 6 times a week, as well as the Washington Post, 2 times a week. His moment of confrontation came when a cartoon about Hamas was pulled from the Post website in 2023, accused of being racist in its caricature.
I do believe that political cartooning is a necessary element in self-governance. Not only is it a catalyst for thought, but it's a call to action. I want to promote liberty and democracy in our republic.
They are great documents for a moment in time.
Editorial cartooning itself has a long and varied history, dating back to the 1600s.
This could reach people who weren't quite literate.
We got a sampling from Sarah Duke, curator of popular and applied graphic art at the Library of Congress, which holds 140,000 cartoon prints and drawings.
Here we have a group of vultures waiting for the storm.
So when was this?
This is 1871, and this is Tammany Hall in New York. It's the Democratic stronghold, and Boss Tweed ends up fleeing the United States.
A key point, Duke says, editorial cartoons have always changed with the times and with new technology, and that has affected their impact.
We had, the copper engravings, maybe a few dozen could be printed and distributed, and then we had the rise of the lithograph, and you had a few thousand, and then you had Harper's Weekly and editorial cartoons at the peak of newsprint because they were distributed by syndicates. You're talking
millions.
Millions.
Yeah.
And now you're talking potentially millions via social media, Instagram, Blue Sky, Facebook, all places to ingest editorial cartoons.
In fact, Ann Tellness left the Post for Substack, an online platform where creators build a direct relationship with their audience through subscriptions. She now has 91,000 followers, a readership and earnings, but arguably less influence, for now at least, than at a major newspaper like the Post. One thing she feels she does have, more freedom to say what she wants. Recently, in the wake of the president appointing himself chair of the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, she depicted him on stage with a conductor's baton topped by a swastika, and portrayed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth with a tattoo across his chest reading, "I'm not a defense secretary, I just play one on TV." For his part, Michael Ramirez continues to skewer what he sees as progressive dogma and democratic impotence. But he's also deeply critical of President Trump's tariffs and many aspects of the MAGA movement. Here, a Republican elephant on a deserted island says to an abandoned man, "I know how you feel. I'm a free market constitutional conservative."
Today's cartoon is really a mirror of where I am. It's so strange that in today's politics, the roles have been reversed. This kind of reactionary populism on one side, and then the extreme progressive ideas. And I think most people are sort of caught in between.
For both cartoonists, the stakes are incredibly high, a test of democratic values, and extend beyond the U.S. Tellness spoke recently in the Netherlands for World Press Freedom Day.
Autocrats especially do not like editorial cartoons. They are the great equalizer, and they don't like being laughed at. If editorial cartoonists all of a sudden go away, that means something else is following. Other voices will be silenced. And it's not that great a leap to go from an editorial cartoonist being silenced through threats or whatever to you sitting around, having coffee with your friends, and you're joking about politics nowadays, and you're making fun of the president or the prime minister or your local politician, and somebody reports you. And then you get questioned about your political beliefs. It's not that big of a jump.
An urgent warning from one cartoonist offered with pencil and brush. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown in Washington, D.C.
Remember, there's always a lot more online, including our PBS News Digital Weekly program that reviews the week's top events and political headlines. You can see that on our YouTube page. Be sure to watch Washington Week with The Atlantic tonight on PBS. Jeffrey Goldberg and his panel discuss the most consequential moments of the first 100 days of President Trump's second term. And on PBS News Weekend, we're covering the funeral service of Pope Francis and how his legacy could shape the future of the Catholic Church. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, I'm Amna Nawaz. Thank you for joining us and have a great weekend.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions and friends of the NewsHour, including Kathy and Paul Anderson and Camilla and George Smith. The Walton Family Foundation, working for solutions to protect water during climate change so people and nature can thrive together.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS NewsHour. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
It really matters when you have an opportunity to give back.
Being part of something that's bigger than myself, that's what brings me happiness.
Being able to integrate your professional career with some of these other things that are important to you, it's critical to be happy at the end of the day.
You know, this is our community too, and we want to participate and give back to it.
People want those opportunities to make an impact and a difference.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the NewsHour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.